Jambo. That's a Kish Swahili term meaning hello. I'm Lenrod Nzulu Baraka, also known as Leonard R. Phillips. I'm the founder of Afro-Caribbean Spiritual Teaching Center and the Children of Kush publications. Now, both these organizations were created to establish a paradigm shift in Black thought. And the way in which we seek to go about creating this paradigm shift is through our presence online, on social media, on writing articles, which may very well end up in the newspapers and the news media, not only in Barbados, but around the Caribbean, and of course in the publication of our books. We're currently expanding a series that I started a while back, of books entitled Secrets Your Church Won't Tell You. And these books, there are 6 so far, and they include Rebirth of Black Civilization, Making Africa and the Caribbean Great Again, The Grand Failure, How Christianity Became a Source of Evil in the World, Fortified Chicken Broth for Black Souls, Out of Babylon, Why Black People Should Leave Most Churches, The Church That Changed Its God, The Rise and Fall of Seventh-day Adventism, and Is God a Moral Monster? Secrets Your Church Won't Tell You. Now, it is hoped that as people become familiar with our articles, the videos which we produce online, and of course in the literature, that what we produce would have an impact in terms of challenging Black people to move away from the Eurocentric thought patterns. Now, before I get into my presentation for this broadcast, the entire nation of Barbados was thrown into a little uproar when it was announced in late December that our general election would be held on the 19th of January. And of course, that caught many people by surprise. And one of the things I've been noticing as I move around Barbados is that normally you would see posters from the Barbados Labour Party, and you would see posters from the Democratic Labour Party. But so far, I'm only noticing posters from the Barbados Labour Party, which makes me wonder to what extent the Democratic Labour Party has been preparing for these elections. Of course, it would be a rather interesting thing if the Democratic Labour Party were to decide that the election notice was too short, and therefore that they will not contest the election. Now, that would be a very interesting thing. Of course, it would probably mean that the Barbados Labour Party would again win all 30 seats, but it would be a break from precedent in terms of the normal course that our parliamentary system takes. And I'm one of those people who is of the opinion that we really need to relook at our political arrangement. This election is, of course, going to be the first election since Barbados became a republic. And of course, when Barbados became independent in 1966, there were 2 things that Barbados maintained that probably should have gone at that time. Number one, we maintained the Queen as our head of state. And number two, we retain the British Privy Council as our highest court of appeal. Now, with the creation of the Caribbean Court of Justice in 2005, the latter was corrected, while the declaration of Barbados as a republic in November 30 this year corrected the former. Now, as independent nations in the Caribbean, I agree that the Caribbean states should have a Caribbean Court of Appeal as our highest court, rather than having a British court as our highest court of appeal. Now, to guarantee that the shift from the constitutional monarchy that Barbados previously was to the republic is not just a cosmetic change, I suspect that there may be a number of other things that we may want to review from our colonial past. And one of the things that I would like to suggest that needs reviewing is the entire Westminster system of government. I think it's an anachronism. I also think it is counterproductive and unsustainable for small countries in the Caribbean to have their population divided into two warring camps, who sometimes actually come to blows, as in the case of some of our neighbors here in the Caribbean, and of course in Haiti. I also think it's an insult to the people of the Caribbean to have a situation where opposition political parties, as a matter of course and of fact, are forced to oppose anything proposed by the government, irrespective of whether the idea is good and the benefits the idea has for the masses of the people. It is also almost axiomatic that once the government says A, the opposition is going to say B. And that to me is not a sustainable way of operating and developing a country. I'm thinking that as we go forward as a republic, we may want to experiment with such things like greater power sharing, where political parties, different political parties can have part of leadership. I was doing some research recently and I discovered that in, I think it's Switzerland, you have a situation where the different parties, the leaders are rotated. So this whole struggle and fighting among the political parties is pretty much negated. Not only should we think in terms of power sharing, but we may also want to, explore the whole idea of finding another system outside of the two-party system. Because of the crises that we are faced with, most countries really and truly require the best brains. Now, you have a situation when you have a country divided between two warring political camps. You may very well find that one person in the opposition may have the best solutions, but these best solutions will never make it to the light of day, because obviously the opposition will not want the government to look good. And of course, by the time they win the government, then it may be too late, and irreparable damage may have already been done to the country. So we really need to take a second look at what we are doing in terms of our political arrangement. Other colonial throwbacks that may need reviewing include our educational curriculum, which I also happen to think is very outdated and is not right now feeding the true needs of our growing population. We may also want to look at the overarching governing political philosophy. Most Black countries who have eventually gained their independence have either gone capitalist or communist. Are these the only two options that are available? Is it possible that there could be other systems of government that may work even better than just the strict capitalist or communist or Marxist or socialist concepts, which were all evolved in the European context. Another thing we may want to look at as we go forward as a republic is our spiritual and cultural orientation. To what extent are we practicing a culture that is uniquely our own, or are we being heavily influenced by a culture that emanates from outside of our region? Then we may also want to look at some of the antiquated Victorian slants that are the underpinnings of our legal structure. And of course, we may want to look at our political association with the rest of the Caribbean and with the continent of Africa. Now, on YouTube, you may have come across a lady by the name of Dr. Chikambori, Ariana Chikambori. And Dr. Chikambori has been pushing the concept of the creation of Wakandan cities of excellence. And they've been marked, I think, 2 places in Africa. I think one is in Zimbabwe. I can't remember exactly where the other one is. But they're hoping that people within the diaspora would be willing to invest money and build these Wakandan centers of excellence, which would be some high-tech cities that you would have the very best in terms of Black science, Black medicine, Black architecture. And I think this is all a very good thing. But I'm also wondering if perhaps Barbados could not think of becoming the first truly community or nation of Black excellence, where the very same things that Dr. Chikambori hopes to achieve within her Wakandan cities of excellence, that Barbados as a nation could be striving for some of these very same things. But of course, for this to occur, our leadership structure would have to be very visionary, and we would have to be looking at the knowledge explosion and how we can take the explosion of knowledge that has taken place in the world and use that explosion of knowledge as the fuel for the further development of Barbados. As mentioned in the first broadcast, where there's a lack of knowledge, the people will perish. I'm going to take a pause at this point. When I come back, I'm going to go into the subject for today. And that subject will be looking at the concept of God from the African perspective. Welcome back to the second part of this presentation. One of the tracks in the classic musical Sound of Music says, "Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start." Now, I've decided to take Julie Andrews' advice and start at the very beginning. Religionists, philosophers, scientists through the centuries have pondered the question of the origin of all things. Religions affirm that all things began with a spaceless, timeless, self-existent, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, omnibenevolent being called God. Now, the name for God may differ from religion to religion, and the concept of God may also vary from religion to religion. The different names and different concepts, however, seek to capture the essence of a being who is supposed to be the first cause of all that is, the prime unmoved mover, a being whose existence is causeless and timeless. As creator of space and time, the being called God is supposed to exist outside of both time and space. Now, in this presentation, I will focus on the traditional African religious conceptualization of God. Now, from the outset, let me categorically state that the traditional African concept of God is very similar to the European concept of God. And I make this point to remind us that it was all propaganda when the Europeans said that Africans did not know God, that we were basically worshippers of stones, wood, and basically all kinds of other things other than a great creator God. Or, as they said of some of our ancestors, that we were devil worshipping heathens. Now, when the Europeans went in to Africa, one of the things that they noticed that was very conspicuous by its absence was temples. The Africans did not have any elaborate structures of temples, except maybe in ancient Egypt. But in most of sub-Saharan Africa, religion was demonstrated in ways other than by the elaborate systems of temples and ceremonies. Not only did they not have temples, but they also did not have holy books like the Bible or the Quran. And so this led many Europeans to think that the Africans did not have a sophisticated system of religion. And in some cases, some Europeans went so far as to say that the Africans did not have a religion at all. Now, John Mbiti, who has written a number of books on African religion, there's one study which is called the concept of God in African religion. I've not been able to get my hand on that particular volume as yet, but I'm still working on it. The one, however, that I am more familiar with is African religion and philosophy. And so some of the information I'm sharing with you has been drawn from John Mbiti's African Religion and Philosophy. And the point that Mbiti makes is that even though there were no elaborate temples in African traditional religion, or there were no holy books like the Quran or the Holy Bible, the Africans transmitted their knowledge of God in various ways, through proverbs, through short statements, through songs, through prayers, through the names they chose for God, through myths, through stories, and through their various religious ceremonies. Through these simple methods, Africans transmitted their concepts about God from generation to generation. It is therefore a calumny of the highest order to teach that our African ancestors lacked a high conception about the Creator God, who is the first cause of all that is. Now, if you go to any Western school of religion or theology, when you discuss the subject of God, you will come across a number of terms. You will come across terms like omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, transcendence, immanence, eternal, self-existent. And the Europeans would have us to believe that these terms are used to depict God in the highest and most evolved sense. But as we are going to see shortly, whereas our African ancestors may not have used these terminologies, they did not have elaborate theologies that may have expounded on these particular concepts. Yet we'll find that all of these concepts were present among various African people. Let's look, for example, at the quality of omniscience, or the ability to know everything. Africans understood that the Creator was omniscient or all-knowing. The Zulus, for example, believed God to be the wise one. The Akan people referred to God as he who knows all or sees all. The Yoruba affirm that God is wise and that he is a discerner of the hearts who sees both the inside and the outside of man. Among another people, the Barundi, they call God the watcher of everything. The Igla teach that the ears of God are very long. The Baganda visualize God as the great eye and the sun which becomes its light everywhere. Now, these concepts clearly show that traditional African religion conceived God as being omniscient. Nothing could escape his vision or his hearing or his knowledge. God knows everything and everything, and has seen and hears everything. Omnipresence. Now, when you think in terms of omnipresence, you're thinking in terms of the ability to be everywhere simultaneously. And a contemplation of the thought of God being omnipresent would almost suggest to us that an omnipresent God would have revealed himself to all of mankind, not simply a small group of insignificant people in the Middle East. Omnipresent God would have revealed himself, and every single nation on the face of the earth would therefore have some kind of knowledge of this omnipresent God. So what about our ancestors in Africa? Did they also have an impression? Were they also taught by this omnipresent spirit they call God? The Ila have a saying that God has nowhere or no when that he comes to an end. The Barmoon call God Njini, which means he who is everywhere. The Barundi and the Kanu people say that God is met everywhere. The Langi people teach that God is like the air or the wind. So clearly we find the concept of God being omnipresent among our African ancestors. What about the whole idea of omnipotence, or the ability to be all powerful? Now, remember when I was in college, I had a very good friend from Guadeloupe, Justin Sinclair, and he used to ask some very interesting questions. Like one time he asked me the question, he said, Rodney, do you believe that God can create a stone that he cannot lift? And the catch in that particular question was that if God could create a stone that he could not lift, then it meant that he was not omnipotent. However, if he could not do it, then it meant that he was not omniscient or all-knowing. So those were just some of the philosophical ideas that were discussed in the college setting. So how did some of our African ancestors view the omnipotence or the ability of God to be all powerful? The Yoruba, the Akan, and the Ashanti people use names for God which depict a being who was all powerful and almighty. The Zulus teach when God roars that all nations are struck with terror. The Nagumbi, who are forest people, praise God as the one who clears the forest. The Banyarwanda repeat a proverb that says that a plant protected by God cannot be hurt by the wind. The Tiga people say that God is the one who makes the sunsets. The forces of nature are all considered to be under the control of God. Two other terms that Western theology uses to describe God are transcendent and immanence. So let's try to figure out whether the Africans had a concept of God being transcendent and being immanent as well. Or interestingly enough, I should say that these two terms almost seem to be paradoxical or to be contradictory. Because when you talk about transcendence, it means to be beyond. In other words, you're trying to convey the idea that God is beyond the reach of mankind. Man cannot, by searching, find out God as you find expounded in the Bible. Whereas immanence is the exact opposite, that God is very close to man. So we find this tension existing in Western theology, and we also find a similar concept among the Africans because like Christians, Jews, and Muslims, traditional African religion also teaches that God is transcendent. He is far removed from man, but they also teach that God is very near to us as well. Then in terms of his eternal nature, did God always exist? The Akan affirm that God is there now as from ancient times. The Tonga refer to God as the Ancient of Days, a very interesting term, which is also used in the biblical book of Daniel to describe God, where God is also called the Ancient of Days. The Ngombe people call God the everlasting one of the forest. Now, traditional African religions, like most other religions, associate God with the sky. God is always seen to somehow abide within the heavens. As a matter of fact, some African groups or peoples talk about man descending from the sky, being sent down, or that God removing himself into the heavens to separate himself from humanity. It should be also noticed that traditional African religion believes that God is involved in his creation and that there's no space there or time when he cannot be found. Now, John Mbiti takes special pains to make the point that African religion, that traditional African religion was not pantheistic. They did not view everything to be God, and they did not view God as everything. That was not the traditional African view concept of God. God was separate from his creation, but yet he could be found within creation. Self-existence, of course, there's the question just a few days back. I was in a discussion with a gentleman, and we got to the question of the origin of all things. And of course, the question came up, well, if God is the origin of all things, then who created God? And that, of course, introduced us to a discussion on the concept of the infinite regress. And ultimately, you will have to admit that there must have been something that existed without having been brought into existence by something other than itself. Now, theologians and philosophers refer to that thing as the first cause. And of course, Christians, Jews, and Muslims refer to that as God. And all other ethnic groups also view that first cause that is causeless as God. So how do the Africans view God with respect to existence? The Zulus had a name for God, which means he who is of himself, meaning no one originated him, he came by himself or of himself. The Bambut teach that God was the first, who was always in existence and would never die. According to the Gikuyu, God has no father, no mother, no wife, no children. He is all alone. He is neither a child or an old man. He's the same today as he was yesterday. So here are some clear concepts where you find traditional African religion referring to God as being self-existent, just as we were taught in Western theology. And of course, God is viewed as a spirit being. There's a hymn among the pygmies which goes like this. It says, "In the beginning was God, today is God, tomorrow will be God. Who can make an image of God? He has no body. He is as a word which comes out of your mouth. That word, it is no more. It is past and still lives. So is God." Then we have the Shona people who refer to God as the Great Spirit. And we find among the Ashanti, God is called he's called the Fathomless Spirit. Let's look at some of the characteristics of God that are found among the African peoples. God is thought to be merciful. He's thought to be kind. He's thought to be a helper of mankind. He brings comfort to mankind. He is good. He both creates and uncreates, which pretty much reminds me of the statement in Isaiah, where God says, "I create and I destroy." And God also can be triggered into anger. And when God is angry, then you can get floods and droughts and locusts and national calamities, which pretty much sounds as though our African ancestors knew Yahweh or Jehovah, because all of these were qualities that were very prevalent in the God of the Old Testament, especially. So what exactly is the takeaway from all of this? What are some of the conclusions we can draw? First of all, traditional African religion has a very sophisticated view of the Creator God. Secondly, our African ancestors were not primitive devil-worshipping heathens, as Europeans portrayed them more or less as a pretext for the inhuman treatment that they dished out to our ancestors. Thirdly, Europeans did not introduce the concept of the Creator God to Africans. And fourthly, Europeans simply introduced religion clothed in the garments of European culture. So that is basically what Europeans gave to Africa. Not a concept of God or not God, but rather they gave Africans European culture dressed up in a religious garment. So to conclude then, we can say an omnipotent creator certainly would have revealed himself to our African ancestors. African religious traditions are worthy of study, as are the spiritual religious traditions of Europeans and Jews. The European and Jewish concept of God is simply that, the European and Jewish concept of God. The God claims of Europeans and Jews should not be viewed as the exclusive or the normative universal view about God. It is very likely that most civilizations arrived at only a partial understanding of the Creator. It is only as we put all of these understandings together that we can arrive at a clear understanding of the concept we call God. There's a very interesting parable which talks about seven blind men who went to view an elephant. And in the parable, each of the blind men was allowed to touch a different part of the elephant and then asked to describe the elephant based on the sensory input they got from touching that particular part of the elephant. And as to be expected, each blind man described the elephant in terms of the sensory data he received by touching the elephant. The moral of the story is that each blind man was right in what he affirmed based on his sensory input, but wrong in what he denied, because there was so much more that he did not experience from the sensory perspective. And so, as we are told in the New Testament, on the subject of God, we all see through a glass darkly. Humility, therefore, should be the order of the day when discussing subjects like God and the origin of the universe. There's just too much that we do not know for us to be so dogmatic in our pronouncements. In the next segment of this presentation, I will explore the concept of God in the Abrahamic religions, and I will be offering a critique, so things may get rather hot in that presentation. Feel free to like and share this video with all your contacts, both in the African diaspora and on the continent of Africa. Asante sana, which means thank you very much, and kwaheri, which also means goodbye.